familiar with it, called Psychological Constructionism.
Yeah.
The big name most associated.
That's anger. He cares very deeply.
So if you ask anyone, right, not just a psychologist, it wasn't something I had heard about until I started teaching the class, but I'll give it my best shot. And so the perspective that came up on the board, and I think is important to acknowledge, is a totally separate model of emotion called psychological constructionism.
Yeah.
The big name most associated with this perspective is Lisa Feldman Barrett. She has this great book, How Emotions Are Made, as well as some really great TED Talks.
That's a great
she
title,
was also,
actually. It's,
right?
I mean, it fits the constructionism part real well.
Right. And she also was the primary counterpoint to all of the interviews with Peltner and Ekman after the release of Inside Out. So any article you read that was like, what Inside Out got wrong, interviewed her. Yeah. So psychological constructionism is a attempt to deal with what's called the emotion paradox. So this paradox that had been kind of identified in the literature was that people have really vivid and clear and distinct experiences of emotion. So if you ask anyone, right, not just a psychologist, if you ask anyone about experiences of anger and sadness and happiness, that they can very clearly report on having those experiences themselves, on witnessing those emotions in others, understanding the implications of those emotions. There do seem to be, at least in our social experience, very clear, distinct, discrete emotions. But when you look to the psychophysiological and neuroscientific evidence, right? So the attempt to find these emotions in the brain and in the body, there is absolutely no consistent evidence for the existence of discrete categories of experience. So first and most obviously, you cannot find anger in the brain. And that sounds really obvious.
So it's not
there isn't an anger.
So it's not even isolated enough in imaging studies, is that?
No. So not only is there obviously not an anger center of the brain or whatever that means, but we know that, right? That we've kind of moved past this modern day phrenology. We know that psychological and cognitive experiences are in networks of activity and in patterns of activation, but there aren't even consistent patterns and networks.
Yeah.
So, and we also know from early research that there are not consistent autonomic and parasympathetic nervous system activation in response to discrete memory. So classic emotion perspective, William James, right, wrote on emotion. And on one hand, when he was writing, he got a lot right? Read stuff he has on the self and on consciousness, and it's killer. But in his perspective on emotion was that the physiological experience is the emotion.
Yeah.
So you encounter stimulus in the environment, and your body does something automatically and unconsciously. And then that is the experience of the emotion. Not that shapes your experience or that shapes your interpretation, but that literally is the emotion. But what that requires is that each emotion has a distinct and unique profile of arousal, and there's just no evidence for that.
Right.
Instead, we see kind of a non-specific pattern of physiological arousal that when you're activated, your heart starts beating faster, you start breathing a little heavier, your pupils dilate, you might sweat a little, but it's the same stuff going on in your body when you are worried about a test and when you're watching a scary movie and when you're turned on by your new date. All of these things in the body look very similar, and you have to look to the context to figure out what it is. So all that together is what this constructionism perspective is responding to, is that there just is no evidence for these discrete categories of experience. Instead, it seems that emotions are constructed events in the moment rather than these like fixed constructs. One description that I really like likens it to any other type of human concept or category that doesn't exist in nature, but is still real to people. So for example, like the concept of pet, right? Pet is a real human concept, but it isn't some objective reality that exists in the world, that's a meaning that we have imposed.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah. So this perspective says that emotion categories are learned. There's so much more room for learning and personal experience and context and culture that there just aren't these pre-made packages programmed into our bodies or brains.
That sounds reasonable, especially the social and cultural pieces to it. So I can understand why the two camps go back and forth on this one.
Yeah, absolutely. I will say, though, that, a basic model of emotion doesn't disregard the importance of learning and context and appraisal.
Okay, yeah, sure.
So, right. So like the earliest perspectives, right, like Darwin's perspective on emotion, it was much more basic, I guess, and fundamental. But appraisal still matters a lot. And there are, multiple perspectives that allow for substantial variation across cultures, both in the rules that govern what is okay to display or not, or how we regulate our emotions, or what the ideal emotions are that we strive for. So that perspective says that, like humans have these innate emotion categories that our bodies respond to a stimulus in the environment in a given way, but learning and culture still shape the way that those are revealed or experienced.